Welcome to Pagan Coffee Talk. Here are your hosts, Oswin and Lord Knight. So today's topic is we look to nature.
And we say this a lot in the pagan community.
We do, don't we?
And again, I'm going to ask you. So, what do you think we mean by this?
Well, when we look to nature, when I look to nature, I'm seeing basically an explanation for a lot of things that we do, and for a lot of things that I believe. Like we've got laws of the universe, right?
Right.
So we've got, the moon and the tides and the sun and the earth, orbits, the stars, how they interact with everything.
Yeah.
I'm also seeing roles for male and female.
Well, think about it this way. Like most forms of martial arts
Yeah.
are actually based on other animals. Tiger style, crane style.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I believe there's even a praying mantis style.
I believe so.
All right. In which people have been watching nature to learn forms of defense.
Right.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
We do the same thing. When we look at nature, we're looking at nature. Okay, mammals are mainly male and female.
Right. There are some exceptions, but
Very few.
right.
Yes, we do have some creatures like frogs. What are those called?
Amphibious.
Amphibious.
Mm-hmm.
Most amphibious creatures, like frogs and stuff like this, are able to change sexes in extreme circumstances. We cannot.
Right.
So again, a law of nature. Another law of nature we can also look at is gravity.
Right.
Gravity affects the hog just as much as it does the mouse.
Right.
But it sure in the world don't stop the hog from catching the field mouse.
Oh, absolutely not.
But we say this, and the majority of the times this line of thought normally goes into recycling and stewardship of the earth.
Right.
But, I mean, when we're looking at nature, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at how to behave. What are the laws? What are the rules of life? Not the rules of nature, but the rules of life itself. We see the battle between predator and prey.
Right.
And we identify with that struggle that is in nature. Because, I'm sorry, even though we don't get down and down fight anymore, but that struggle is still there, from finding a job to maintaining it and getting better education and on and on.
Right.
It's still there.
Right. There are things we do still battle for,
Right.
just not in the ways that we used to.
Right. I mean, and it also helps us understand conscious and unconscious behavior.
Right.
There's certain behaviors that we have as humans that are just, we're going to do it. Kids, even if you as a parent do not have that sex talk with your kids, they will figure it out on their own.
Sure they will. I did.
I did. It's not something you got to go actually take a class for.
No.
You figure it. It doesn't take much to figure it out. Hey, even those kids on the Blue Lagoon figured it out.
Right?
Funny how that is. No adults around, but yet they figured that out.
They figured it out.
And she even figured out she was pregnant and gave birth.
Right.
So, I mean, we hear this all the time, though, that we look to nature. And then you hear them say that, and then you hear some baloney that makes no sense to me. I remember people having this conversation, and then they suddenly went to recycling in the environment.
Okay, that's kind of bizarre.
I know. The conversation I heard from this, where I got this idea from, was this is how it went. And then suddenly they're talking about stuff. And then suddenly they jump into environmentalism. And I'm like, okay, how does that have to do with looking at nature?
Well, I mean, I guess in some ways it could relate to that. I mean, nature does kind of teach us how to be good stewards.
Nature, we work with nature,
Yeah.
when farms and stuff work with nature, oh God, we can get away with it for years. Rotating.
Right. So I can kind of see where that recycling conversation kind of fits in.
compost heaps and stuff like
Right.
that, using nature to refuel nature to keep on growing stuff. And
Right, if that's what you're talking about.
but this is not what they
But
were
if you're
talking.
talking about, recycling plastics and aluminum and tin and
That's what they got into, and the solar panels and all this. Now we say we look at nature and we look at like solar panels. Solar panels are only good for 10 to 15 years.
right,
And then after they're done, and we can't recycle them. These things have heavy metals and stuff in there that can hurt us.
right,
Oh, we're just going to throw them into the junkyard. We're not going to think beyond today.
right,
And this is where I hear a lot of people talk about, we look to nature. They don't look past today. Oh, we need to get rid of these straws. We need to get rid of these plastics. And we have this plastic island off the shore
right,
of the United States, but nobody's ever sat there and go, well, how did they get there? Well, it got there because we kept on packing up all our plastic to ship overseas so these poor countries can separate our
right,
plastics up so they could recycle them, and it never happens
right,
because, well, people got to understand it's more complicated to recycle plastic versus glass. Yeah, and again, you got these windmills. These 50-foot windmills cannot be recycled once they're done. Only good for 15 to 20 years.
right,
All right. And then you still have to put lubricants in there, oil-based lubricants,
right,
which they can still leak and damage the environment.
right. So how's that helping?
How's that help?
How's that being a good steward?
But nobody wants to do nuclear. And God forbid that we've actually advanced the technology more and more to where in the world you can actually have a private nuclear reactor at home
Right,
safely. Why don't we try some other things? Because I'm sorry, yes, you would be amazed at how much power solar panels would make even on cloudy days
right,
compared to what it's like on a non-cloudy day. The fact is you're still making less power.
right. But if you're looking at being a good steward of the earth,
You have to think beyond yourself.
right, and you have to think, okay, solar panels, yeah, they can help, but they're going to be more of a detriment in the long term.
The pagan community needs to think along the lines of we need to plant trees that we will never sit under their shade.
Right,
It's not about us. It's about the next generation. What are we leaving them?
right.
And all we're leaving them are landfills and all this other stuff.
Full of junk.
All right. Again, if I remember correctly, the progression of stuff, we used to use paper bags that could carry a lot more groceries
Yes.
and use less of them. But we didn't want to cut down the trees because of the environment. So
Right.
we started using these plastic bags that can only handle one item at a time. And you take home 50 of them, throw them away in the trash.
Right.
But hey, those paper bags can be taken out to your yard,
And
sat
use as
down,
compost.
and used as compost and be recycled. Go figure.
Right.
It was so much better with the plastic, ain't it?
Yeah, and then, you look at all those plastic bags and like you said, they're going into the trash. Well, I know there are some grocery stores in our area and you can take your bags back, your plastic bags, and put them in a bin to be recycled. But then again, what happens when they send those off to be recycled?
Are they sending them off to some
Or
poor third world country?
where they potentially get dumped in the ocean
Right,
to contribute to our little plastic island,
right.
right? That's out there floating around.
But yet,
Or is it actually getting recycled?
when we were growing,
What's the cost of that recycling?
but yet when we were growing up, all our sodas came in glass bottles,
Yes.
and I mean the 20-ounce whatever, and you took the glass bottles back for them to be washed and reused,
Right.
and it was a 5-cent deposit.
Right.
This makes a whole lot better sense for recycling to me to do this versus buying some bottle of plastic
That has to be melted down.
that has to be melted down and sent overseas to be separated. And then the majority of the times when you go into, and I've worked enough housekeeping, you go into these places and you see the recycling trash cans.
Mm-hmm.
If you pull that lid off, there's only one bag in there. It all goes in the damn trash.
Pretty much, yep.
Because no hospital, no corporation is going to spend the money it takes to pay somebody to sit down there and separate that out.
Nope.
It's cost too much money. And I hate to be this way. A lot of people, I believe a lot of people in the pagan community are fooling themselves to make themselves feel better.
Well, yeah, and I mean that was my point. What is the cost of the recycling? What resources are we using? How much are we having to pay to use those resources to recycle a plastic bag?
Right.
I mean, you look at Walmart and the vest that the Walmart employees wear, say, oh, it took X amount of bottles, plastic bottles, like 7 bottles to make this vest.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that's 7 bottles or 15 bottles or whatever it is. Is that really cost efficient?
Well, I mean, that's like the industrial hemp being illegal.
Right.
But yet, Henry Ford, the guy that made the Ford company,
Yep.
built a whole car out of hemp.
Yes, it did.
And even fueled it on hemp. But yet, hey, our gas prices are still fucking $4.
Right.
All right, people. Y'all want to talk about recycling and stuff. Let's start actually talking about this. Y'all want to be good stewards of the earth. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about y'all want to talk about all these electric cars and stuff. And you don't realize that the batteries take heavy metals, which tear up the earth more for us to find those.
Right.
Versus regular stuff.
Yeah. And what happens when we have to replace those batteries?
Exactly.
Where are those batteries going?
Oh, they're going to the dump.
They're going to the landfills.
They're going to the landfill. And
guess what? All that toxic material is being dumped into our ground.
And guess what? You're still having to use lubricants in this car,
yes.
Which means you're still using oil.
Yes.
So what are we doing?
I mean, we can cut down on the usage.
We can. I mean, if we had more nuclear...
We're still going to have to use natural resources.
We're still going to have to use natural resources.
But,
we just need to use them more smartly.
Right, more efficiently.
I mean, again, think about it this way. As far as this goes, there is only so much you can efficient your house by. There's only a certain point you can go to, and then after that, it stops. You can't make it any more efficient.
Right.
We're never going to get 100% efficiency out of anything.
No.
All right, we can get awful close. We can get that 99.99999, but we'll never get 100%.
No.
Now, what we can do is efficient our house to that point and then start to see about trying to generate our own power. And I'm sorry, but for like us and those that live out in the country who have these septic tanks, why in the world we don't have septic tanks where we can bleed the methane off of it to run generators?
Right.
I mean, I know they're out there, but come on. That's a whole lot better to spend your money on versus solar panels. Because I'm still back to what are we going to do with them when they run out? Right. If we have this many all over the country and blah, 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 what are we going to do? Are we going to have a problem with all the landfills are filled up because they got solar panels in them?
Well, and not far from where we are, there's a field of solar panels.
Yes.
I mean, a field.
Well, I remember being younger and they've coming out with all these technology. They built this generator that uses water steam power.
Right.
But they put it out in the desert. They put this big column up in there and focused all these lights into it so it superheats it. And now if you go look at pictures of it, it's just falling, decaying out there in the middle of the desert. Nobody's using it.
Right.
It was a gimmick. It was just to make you buy their power or work with them. It wasn't an actual thing that they could do. If you think about it this way, it's the same thing they said about the arc reactor in Iron Man.
Yes.
It was a publicity stunt, and that was it. It was never actually work. Yes, theoretically it could, but we're not going to go that far.
No, of course not.
So, again, you still have that same problem there.
Ready for the next topic?
Sure.
The Wheel of the Year. And what I'd like to do with this, instead of going into great detail about what each one is, let's talk more about how they relate to each other, how the wheel spins, how one thing leads to the next.
How it's actually a wheel?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start.
let's start with Samhain since that's our New Year.
New Year's, okay.
So we're going into the dark half of the year.
We're going into the dark half of the year.
What else can you tell us about Samhain?
Well, I mean, this is when the dearly departed souls comes and visits all adults. And again, if we also believe that, if it has not been harvested, it stays in the field now. There's no
Right.
going to run back after Samhain. That's it.
Right, because this is the last harvest of the year.
Right. So we've gotten everything we can. And if it's out there, it's left for the gods and nature. All right. And it stays that way. And then we move on to Yule.
Right.
Now, Yule is a solar festival, and it's based on the length of day.
Okay.
All right. At this point, the day is at the shortest point in a year. After Yule, after the day of Yule, the days will actually start to grow. All right. Hence the reason there's a lot of the overtones of the sun god being a baby and reborn about this time.
Okay, yeah.
All right. Because the idea is that as the days grow longer, the sun grows up.
Right.
All right. Which then brings us to Imbolc.
Imbolc.
All right. Which is the beginning of spring. All right. Now, again, it's still cold and all this, but it's starting to warm up enough to where you can let your livestock out of the building.
Okay, yeah.
During the day for a little while. They wouldn't be able to stay out there all night. You'd still have to bring them back in and keep them warm by the fire.
Right, but you're also starting your spring cleaning.
And right, getting your stuff out, delousing yourself because you're sleeping with your livestock because you're only heating one building all winter. So you're doing that. You're prepping for sowing.
Yeah, sowing the seeds.
Planting season and stuff like this. Because as we get closer to that, which around Astara is when we're actually going to start doing a lot of the planning if we haven't already started.
Right.
Because Astara is the Henge month or a Henge festival.
Right.
It's again another one of the lessers, and it's based on the length of day to night. The day and the night are equal about this time.
Right.
All right. So
now that's funny thing is though, between the solstices and the equinoxes, the solstices do not happen on a global instance. The equinoxes do.
Yes.
The time of the solstice is different depending on your location.
Right.
But the equinox happens at the same time
for
globally.
Everybody. Yeah.
Which is interesting to me for some reason.
So then this is about halfway through. So we're halfway through spring about this time.
Right.
Which means we got to be moving into summer, which brings us to
Beltane,
which is the beginning of summer, another grand. Again, it's celebrated on the eve, like Christmas Eve and New Year's and all this.
Right.
Just like all the other grands. And again, this is, hey, the plants are growing. It's not really harvest time. But hey, you know what? It's time to start thinking about other things that need to be planted.
Like what?
Oh, I don't know. The seeds in some bellies or something.
Okay.
We need to be having some children's.
Okay.
All right. So we've started summer.
Right.
So then we go to the summer solstice, which is
Litha.
And this is now the days longer than the night. This is the shortest night of the year, but the longest day.
Okay.
All right. This marks our midpoint of summer. After this day, the days will start getting shorter again, which marks the beginning of all our harvest.
Right.
All right. Which then moves us into Lunasa, which is another grand.
Right.
And the beginning of fall. All right. For us, this is the first day of fall. And again, we're back to, we're doing our harvesting. We're doing that first harvest.
Mm-hmm.
And getting the early stuff out, not a lot, some more fresh vegetables and stuff like that. Everybody's still kind of more fooling around.
Wouldn't we also be, this would also be a time for those farmers who have livestock to also start culling the herd?
Well, or sort of at least picking out which ones they don't think is going to make it through the winter to thin out the herd a little.
Okay.
All right, the older pigs and other that seems to be at the end of their life cycle. It's easier just to take care of it now and eat the meat through the winter.
Okay.
All right, but that's still not done until on average, it's the first full moon before Samhain.
Right.
So we're still in fall. Then we move to Mabon. Mabon is a hinge, and it notes that the days and the nights are equal.
Right.
And then we start to pass back into Samhain, which is the end of the summer and the beginning of winter again.
Right.
Nobody ever talks about this, but if you notice, all the grands are seasonal. They mark the seasons between the beginning of summer, winter, fall.
Right.
And they are always celebrated in 2 days. And they're always done the eve of, like Christmas and all that. Then you got the lessers, which are based on the sun and the god throughout the year of the length of the day. Make sense?
Yeah. So now we've got the balance of light and dark,
Right.
cold and warm,
Right.
and we've also got a balance of
male
goddess
and
and god.
Right.
Right, male and female.
Male and female, because the goddess is celebrated on the grands, where the lessers celebrate all the god.
Right.
All right. So you have that double spiral there, which again, if you look at that double spiral from the side, you get that image of the double helix,
Right.
which links it back to the whole life thing. Because again, this is 2 different wheels turning together, kind of supporting each other.
Right. And if you look at it from the right angle, you will see that double helix
going down. Now again, when we're doing our grands and lessers and stuff like that, we actually bring you in through the direction which corresponds to the Sabbath.
Right.
Like we put Yule in the south, so during Yule you would actually come into the south gate.
Right.
We call it the gate, but that south little section.
Right.
If your area is big enough to do that.
Right. If it's not, you come in wherever you have access.
Right. I mean, because when you're doing it inside, people don't always put walls in the best places.
No, they don't. No, they don't.
But now, to confuse people even more about this, because in the Southern Hemisphere, they're having the opposite of us at all times.
Right.
So when we're having Yule, when we're having our shortest day of the year, they're having their longest.
Right. They're celebrating Litha.
So when you go into the Southern Hemisphere, you have to flip this to make it make sense.
So for them, instead of Yule being in the south, Yule will be in the north. Litha will be in the south.
So forth and so on. Make sense?
Right.
But now this brings up the interesting question. Now, we believe that the veil is at its thinnest during Samhain through Yule.
Right.
Okay, roughly.
Roughly, yeah.
All right. But does that mean that the same thing happens for us during the summer between Beltane and Litha?
Well, I mean, I guess theoretically it would.
Because at that moment when we're celebrating them in the Southern Hemisphere, they're celebrating Yule.
So,
and they're calling that the shortest night of the year and the veil's at the thinnest. So does that mean that the thinning of the veil happens twice a year and not just once?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we could theoretically say that it does happen only once a year, but it's happening at the same time in both hemispheres.
Right. At different time, at opposite times of the year.
Right.
So is it only thin for the southern half and not the northern half? And when it's Samhain up here, is it just for the northern half and not for the...
Well, I was going to say, but if that's the case, then are they changing the festivals due to the fact that at Beltane, when we're celebrating Samhain, at Beltane, they're celebrating the thin veil?
Or is it the fact is that we're in summertime and we're not thinking about death, we're thinking about life and reproduction, and that thinning of the veil is allowing souls to cross back over and go into children and babies that are just now being born.
Oh, now see, that's an interesting thought because, again, that puts us back in balance.
Right, because that balance is nothing more than, okay, some are coming out of this direction versus this direction during this time of the year, and the number of souls needed until the next conjunction of this for the next 6 months are all in this world until they get their bodies. I'm just asking questions.
So in that case, I guess it would happen twice a year.
Twice a year. So that means that technically during the same time during the summer, we should be able to do certain things that we normally associated with Samhain, like divination, reading the cards, and communicating with the dead.
Right.
During the spring months, during the summer months, just as much as we can in the winter.
Interesting.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, yeah.
If we're keeping it balanced and we're looking at it as a whole, like we should, like a wheel would be.
Right.
Because it has to work together to be a wheel.
Exactly, yes.
How do we justify the fact is that, yes, half the planet is celebrating a season we've already done 6 months ago, and vice versa.
Right. Well, when you look at it that way, they are celebrating something just the opposite of what we're doing.
Right.
So when we're celebrating Samhain and death, they're celebrating life.
Because if you think about it this way, if the veil thinning for the Southern only happens during their Samhain, and ours only happens in the Northern for our Samhain, would these two not cancel each other out?
You would think. So there's got to be something to balance it out. So
right, and not cancel each other out if it's a either or. Either it can only be the southern half or the northern half. It seems like they would cancel each other out because it's not thin on this side of the planet, but it is on this.
Right.
But then on the other hand, but if you think about it this way, high tides and stuff like that, technically
right.
Half the world's low tide when the other side's high tide.
Right. So why wouldn't you have? I love that idea. I know it's something that I never really thought about, but I love that because again, with the high tides and stuff, why would you not have one exit, one entrance?
Exactly.
Going on at the same time. You've got the double helix going on anyway. So
well,
why wouldn't this be the case?
I'm about to get in trouble. What if we think of it as less of a wheel and one of them doors that go around and around?
Oh, the revolving doors?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
And the two exit are the winter and summer solstice.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
You come in, you get on there for a few things, then you exit off, and then you have to walk all the way around and go right back through it again.
Right.
I
think all the analogies work. Thanks for listening. Join us next week for another episode. Pagan Coffee Talk is brought to you by Life Temple and Seminary. Please visit us at lifetempleseminary.org for more information, as well as links to our social media: Facebook, Discord, Twitter, YouTube, and Reddit.
We travel down this trodden path, a maze of stone and mire. Just hold my hand as we pass by a sea of blazing pyres. And so it is the end of our days, so walk with me till morning breaks. And so it is the end of our days, so walk with me till morning